Ladies and gentlemen. Oh, no. Alright, okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Quiet that, let's go. My name is James, one of the deputy head boys here at John Hampden, and it brings me an immense pleasure to welcome you all to this year's Question Time event. At John Hampden, Question Time is always a highlight, and we hope you share our excitement for debates yet to come. Countless hours of preparation have gone into tonight, and we trust you'll find the evening thoroughly enjoyable. In terms of how tonight is set to run, firstly we'll start off with the student debate, showcasing some of Buckinghamshire's brightest young minds. Following that, we'll take a brief interval, giving the chance to grab some snacks and refreshments from our canteen conveniently located just down the corridor. Then, it's on to the main event with one of the most impressive panels to date. We strongly encourage your active participation for this. After all, it is called Question Time for a reason. Whether you're a member of the public, a local student, a teacher, or simply someone with a keen interest in politics, this is your opportunity to ask your questions. As much as tonight's focus is on the school and esteemed panellists, ultimately, it's about you, our audience. If you have a question to ask the panel, please be patient and wait for Luca Webb, the chair of the main panel, to open the debate for audience participation. Before we proceed, however, just a few quick general reminders. There's no planned evacuation tonight, thankfully, but should the alarm sound, please follow the exits and the guidance of our events team, assembling the car parks via emergency doors. Currently, ensure your phones are on silent and leave any photography or recording to our wonderful AB team located at the back. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Without further delay, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Till, our head of English and tonight's chair of the student panel.
Thank you very much. A very warm welcome to John Hampden for Question Time. I'm trying to work out whether James was including me as one of Buckinghamshire's brightest young minds. I'm assuming not, but we do have a fantastic student panel for you. They are going to introduce themselves. I'm going to say who they are, which school they go to, including a couple from this very school, and something interesting about themselves that might be what they study. Can we start on this end of the panel?
Yeah, hello, I'm Thomas. I just want to say quickly thank you all to coming to one of the biggest political events in Wickham. It's disappointing our local MP couldn't be here, but I've heard he might not be as busy next year, so he might be able to attend. I'm a member of the local Labour Party, and I frequently go out canvassing. I go to school here. That's enough about me.
Sometimes the student panels start bland, not tonight. And next to Thomas, we have.
Hi everyone, I'm Becky. I go to Wickham High School. I study English, history and politics. I'm on the far left of the ideological spectrum, which might cause some to label me a radical, but all I want is social change, equality and justice. Thank you.
Thanks. And next to Becky.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I go to Piper's Corner. I do geography, politics and maths. I'm also a member of the Labour Party, although if I'm being brutally honest, I am not a big fan of Keir Starmer.
There you go. And on the other side, save it for the debate, folks. On the other side of the table, if not ideologically, we have.
Hi there, I'm Malva. I don't belong to any political party. Honestly, I'd rather not be dragged down at this point in time. But I'm a keen debater and I organise the local Bucks in Schools debate competition.
Thank you. And our final. And our final panellist.
Hi there guys, I'm Jack. I also go to school here at John Hampden. Likewise, I'm not affiliated to any political party in particular. I lean slightly more to the right, but please do not make the assumption that I am in favour of our current government, okay? Like, make that distinction clear now. I am also a key member of the debating society here. I've been doing it for almost 6-7 years now, and I believe that's the main reason they asked me on, not for any political interest. I just know how to speak good.
Your student panel, ladies and gentlemen. I think that applause should be mainly for Jack's waistcoat as well, which is frankly like a sixth panellist. Our question is this. After 14 years of the Conservatives in power, is it time for Keir Starmer? And the panellist I'm going to first on that question is Malva.
Undeniably so. I think I mean, what can we say about the last 14 years? It hasn't been great, but what can we say about Keir Starmer? I definitely think he's the one to win the next election. That's clear. He's the one to win the votes. He's the one to bring over the side of the right that possibly aren't, you know, a bit disengaged with their own parties. But do I believe with Keir Starmer as the leader of Labour? I think people on your side would definitely say he's not the man for the job. I think he's the man to win the election. I do.
Okay, a first bit of support. By the way, this has already started, but as an audience, if you agree with what our panellists are saying, then feel free to applaud in a sort of loud and stormy way. If you disagree, don't do the opposite of that. We'll have a nice general respectful disagreement, but do feel free to applaud. So, Malva, some tentative support there for Keir Starmer.
I think
yeah.
support, or I said he'd win the election. I don't know if that's
Oh,
support.
okay.
Just to make that, yeah.
I think might be inevitable. Becky, what do you think?
Well, definitely agreeing with Malva in that the past 14 years, you know, I'm kind of sat here trying to think of something positive that the Tories did, and I kind of couldn't really think of anything. And when you think of everything that's gone wrong, you know, kind of healthcare, education, the state of the economy, I think absolutely change is needed. But Keir Starmer, is he what we need? Is he enough? Because honestly, I look at him and I see a Tory wearing a red tie, to be completely honest. Yeah, I really do. And Malcolm's correct, he'll win. He'll win the next election, and it's good because he'll be the best of a bad bunch. And, you know, a change of scene, if I'm honest. But honestly, looking forward, you know, we just look to the next election short term. That's the problem with politics. We need to look long term. We need to see like big changes and what we could really do in the future. You know, not thinking who's a Tory, who's Labour, whatever. We actually need to make big system changes in order to improve this country because honestly, not looking great right now. So anyway, it's up.
We might come back to what some of those changes should be, but Jack, your first thoughts on this?
I would definitely agree that change specifically, and it looks like that change is going to be Keir Starmer, is necessary, maybe for a slightly different reason we might see anywhere else. I think we need to restore faith in Britain in our democratic process. That is the main issue. We claim to be a two-party state, realistically, Conservatives and Labour. Are we a two-party state if only one party is ever winning an election? Can we really claim to have a real democratic process if one party is always in opposition? I think a different result in the next election needs to happen, not only in order for the Conservatives to sort their act out, which is vital in my opinion, but in order for people to believe that their votes matter and the result is not a foregone conclusion regardless of what they try and participate in, because we need to keep participation numbers up and we need to keep the process of democracy in this country working effectively.
Thanks, Jan. Let's hear from Zoe.
I'm afraid I'm going to agree with most of the panel so far. I think that the last 14 years with Tory government has been a disaster. They've crippled the NHS. Their programme of austerity was a disaster. They seem committed to hate and bigotry. I mean, you look at the scandals, I could list about a dozen without even thinking.
In the last week.
Every single day a new one pops up. I'm like, when will it stop? And I really want it to stop. And I think the only way it's going to stop is if Keir Starmer wins the next election. Because realistically, under first past the post, no one else is going to win. I think maybe someone else should, but I don't think they're going to. And so I think we need to put our weight behind Keir Starmer so we can get the Tories out.
Finally, some first thoughts on this from Thomas.
Well, after 14 years of Conservative failure, our country's broken. We've got more food banks in this country than McDonald's. We had 140,000 children homeless last Christmas, and children are learning in metal cabins because their schools have crumbled. And Rishi Sunak and the Tories don't care about this. They're stuck in their own party drama. But the point is, when you go to the polls this year, you think, am I better off after 22 Conservative tax rises? Am I better off under Rishi's recession, or is it time for change? And they talked about we need a more left-wing candidate, but we put Jeremy Corbyn forward at the last election and he got the worst electoral result since 1939. And I want real change to this country because we can't have another 5 years of this Conservative chaos. And Keir Starmer has a plan to get our country back. He has a plan to get the NHS back on his feet, and he has a plan to get Britain's future back.
Let's talk in terms of actual policy proposals then, because we had this idea from Becky that got a lot of support, I think, that it's going to require more than just a change of whoever is the leader. And if we think that might well be inevitable the way it's going, I'd really like your ideas for, if you had some influence over policy, what your priorities are and what you think that new government needs to do to create a bit of hope for young people like you, I suppose. I don't know if someone wants to start on that, but Tom's back in it.
We need to sort the economy out first, and we need a plan to grow the economy. We need to control our public spending, because public finances at the minute aren't in a position for us to just loosen all the taps and start spending lots of money. So we need to go in and look at this, because national debt's at the highest it's ever been. But we also need a plan. So, for example, housing is a big problem amongst young people these days, and we need to build more houses. And Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have a plan to build 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years, which is what this country needs. We're not going to spend loads of money, but it's going to have a big impact on this country. And I see lots of schemes where we can make the biggest impact in the shortest time with the least amount of public money being spent more, because we don't have the money, and we need to build our public finances up responsibly. I want to see our public services back, but I don't want to see national debt going up even more, because the Conservatives have borrowed and have put taxes up on working people.
So that would be your priorities. Becky, you outlined this sort of slightly bigger vision. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? What do you think needs to happen?
Absolutely. Well, I agree with what you're saying. There needs to be changes, there needs to be economic changes, there needs to be houses built, whatever. But I just heard a bunch of statistics. And I don't know about you, but I'm sick of statistics. I'm sick of being reduced to a statistic as a young person. Whatever percent of young people think that, I want someone in charge who I can relate to. And because honestly, I think I speak for many young people in this country, we feel marginalised, we feel alienated, and they don't care about us. So yes, they were going to build 1.5 million houses. I don't think I'll ever see the fruit of that from Keir Starmer. I can't relate to him. He's an old white man. Just one of many things. He's
very experienced.
Oh, very experienced, yes. Very experienced in capitalism. What do I care about that? Like, no offense, I want someone with a bit of spirit, with a bit of youth, with a bit of hope. Just someone that's going to do a bit of change, something radical. He's not the answer.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, please do. Jack.
The main problem, Tom, with what I've heard, everything that you've been saying there, is it's the same problem that I've been worried about in all government, Tory, Labour, anyone in power for the last 10, 15 years. It all appears to be so short term. We have to look, as young people, we have to look at what the big issues are and what is really necessary to ensure our future. And that has to be the environment. It has to be. It is crucial that more is done and more emphasis is placed on green policies within Tory, within Labour, in order to allow us to have a country where we can conduct economic policies and conduct housing policies later on down the line, because that is what is most prevalent in today's society. It is worrying that Labour thinks they can just slash their Green Pledge by half and think that nobody cares about it. It's worrying that Sunak thinks he can renegade on his promises about petrol and diesel cars and thinks that nobody will notice. It's worrying that they think the electorate doesn't care about the environment. And that is what we have to look to in the long term in order to sustain our country. And that is what is most important.
Zoe, what do you connect with what you've heard so far?
Well, I massively agree that we need to start looking more long term, because at the moment it's how to win the next election, and given the next election is going to be this year, it's very, very short term. I think one of my priorities would be reforming the electoral system, actually. I think first past the post is a disaster. It means that we haven't got any sort of political choice. I personally don't connect that much of either of the two main parties, but I know I'm going to have to vote for Labour because I want the Tories out. It's also causing a lot of political apathy, especially among young people, because we don't feel we have a voice. I think 47% of people think they have no impact in politics whatsoever. That's embarrassing. That's shameful, and I think we should change that. As well as that, I think that we should head more left-wing. I think we should have nationalisation. I think we should have progressive taxation. I think that we should public spend more by taxing the rich, and that's what I believe.
In a moment, I feel I might have to ask for hands up from the audience for questions defending capitalism, otherwise we might have a revolution on the student panel. So if anyone wants to ask those questions, be thinking about them. First, though, I want to come to Malva for your thoughts. We've had a few different ideas, a few people's priorities. What for you stands out? What do you agree with, disagree with?
I think it's all a bit fluffy. I think that, yes, we need to feel kids, young people, they need to feel more engaged in politics. Definitely. I think just saying, oh, we need someone with a bit of spunk, we need someone, I don't really care about spunk, I care whether someone's competent enough to do the job, to be honest. And at the moment, no one really is. People are too focused on giving insults to the other side, thinking short term. It's who has the most insults, who has the most wives, not who has the most ideas for, like the future. It's kind of all black market politics, really. I would also say, just saying, let's stop the taps and public spending, we can't just give out money. I think that's a bit of an insult to the people who were striking recently, not because they just deserve more money, but because they weren't just striking for more money, they were striking to be recognised in society as people who actually mean something in society. Teachers, they're not only just teachers, they're the main caregivers of your children. They're also supposed to be SEN specialists, therapists, all of the above. That isn't in their job description. That wasn't what they're paid to do. But also, do you want a teacher who's working, many more hours than they're paid to do, who are on the last of their tether, to be raising your children as well? I just don't think it's fair on them. I don't think it's fair on your children. I don't think it's fair on you to put that much pressure on teachers, and also nurses who work double shifts, nurses who don't have a lunch break, to be performing surgeries on you. It's not about just giving them more money, it's about giving them a sense that they're worth something in this society. A clapping for the NHS during COVID wasn't enough, and it isn't enough now, so.
Just going to offer Just to round off this question, a right to reply perhaps from this side of the panel around this question of Keir Starmer, whether he is the kind of boring but competent person we need after some years of turmoil and incompetence, one might say, or whether actually personality that someone could connect with is the thing to focus on. We seem to have a disagreement there. Right to reply to Malva on this side.
Is Keir Starmer that competent though? Like politics, like the facade of a politician, right? Especially in the lead up to the general election. They're all making all these promises, seeming very respectable, going out and giving like some bread to some sick children. That's the one time they'll ever do that in their lives. Things like that. It's a publicity stunt. I think Keir Starmer is kind of ramping it up now because of the general election, and I think he'll show his true colours when he gets in power. I mean, like you were saying, unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to vote Labour, which is a bit of a tragedy considering the state that the party's in. It's the only way to get the Tories out. But yeah, I think pitching him is kind of competent, but without personality. I doubt he's got either, to be honest.
Yes, please. Zoe.
So I'm not sure how competent he is. I think we'll find out when he becomes Prime Minister. It's not really an if. But I think that he hasn't got a vision. He keeps U-turning. The moment he thinks something might not be that popular with the electorate, he changes his mind. He's got no opinions. As you said, he's just a Tory wearing a red tie. And I think that we need someone, and in order for people to turn out to vote, we need someone who has a vision, someone who has policies that we can get behind, someone who gives us hope, someone who has real beliefs. I don't think it's a matter of whether they're competent or charismatic. I think we want something to get behind. And at the moment, I look at politics and I see nothing to get behind.
I'm keen to introduce another question into the mix, and I'm going to be bold and suggest a question that actually the student panellists didn't know was going to come up, only because we were talking with our head teacher, Ms. Hartley, in the LRC, and something that's been in the news recently is the question of young people and technology, particularly around a couple of very, very tragic cases, and the parents of the young people concerned now campaigning to have some more safeguards, even restrictions, even things like age restrictions around young people's use of technology, smartphones, social media. So my question is that sort of thing necessary, and is it possible? And I will give a moment for our panellists to consider if someone wants to be the first to come in, because you didn't know you were going to be asked that question.
Okay.
But it seems that's interesting. Jack, would you mind opening the batting on that?
I think you have to be pragmatic first and foremost, and I think you have to look at how applicable it is to implement those sort of ideas. And I think the more useful idea would be advisory measures. I think advisory measures and to allow families to make informed decisions about how their children and their brothers and their sisters and their relatives are using technology in that way. I think we have to give people the responsibility with all of that information so they can make informed decisions, but we have to give them the responsibility to make an active choice for themselves on the matter. And I think to try and control whether or not someone can or cannot do something is a very slippery slope into making these things a commodity. And we do not want the ideas such as time using the internet to be a commodity for young people, because then it becomes a problem where it is sought after and people go to extreme lengths to obtain it, because that is inevitably what happens when something is restricted in such a manner. So it has to be up to families themselves to make the decision with the information which is available, which should be more readily available, I agree, but we cannot force things onto people in this manner.
Any panellists think there is something that could be done?
I think we need to target the source of misinformation, not the people who might be receiving and believing the misinformation. So I don't think it's down to like individual families or people to kind of filter the content they see. I think instead we should be tougher on fake news, things like that. Because the source of the problem isn't the people who are receiving it, it's the people who are creating it. But I also think that there's a very, very fine line between restrictions and between censorship. And we need to be very careful on any technological restrictions placed on children, that we're not restricting them having free and equal access to news and to information. Because I think in order for people to develop their own beliefs, especially when they're young and kind of at a very influenceable age, that people get a well-rounded and accurate source of information.
Seems so far this might be possible. Thomas, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think that in regards to the attack that you mentioned, it was very tragic, but the cause for that, when you look at the Conservative Party and Rishi Sunak picking culture wars with minorities and coming out with transphobic statements, that isn't particularly helping in that case. But on the wider social media perspective, I think there is things that can be done, and particularly with the social media companies, they need to take the weight of responsibility, and they need to put in place very rigorous algorithms to protect and properly protect younger people, because the internet can be a very, very harming place for a lot of young people, especially when they don't know where to go. And we saw it in COVID when they were just left with their phones. A lot of young people suffered because they didn't know about the internet, and there were a lot of harmful things on there, and the social media companies need to put in very, very serious things to stop that, and that's something that the government should be looking at, is putting in them restrictions.
Companies to step up and do more, and government to make them. Agree or something different, though?
I think that practically it's impossible to put restrictions. I go to a school where they tried to entirely ban mobile phones for up to year 11s. It did not work at all. Every single child from year 7 to year 11 has a phone in their bag, and they use it in school, and they text and they take pictures of people and post them online. It doesn't work. The schools tried to clamp down on it, and it just didn't work. It's impossible. I think that instead of trying to do that, which is never practically going to happen, we should, as the other panelists have said, we should go to the source. Like in my school, there's a lot of homophobic stuff going around with people on their phones taking pictures of other people. And the way to combat that isn't to ban phones, it's to tackle the homophobia at the source, it's to tell people that it's not okay, it's to try and tackle the bigotry that so many people have. I don't think that targeting the phones, which are just the vessel through which people spread hatred, is the problem. It's tackling the hatred that's important.
Malvi, you're put in charge of this area of responsibility. What would you do?
I think definitely, as Thomas said, and I believe Becky, it's the people who, you know, you see saying these culture wars, kind of enticing people into these, you know, you see something quickly, you see a cool title, you see one word, you click on it. It's the role models that we have in society that are undeniably just picking on these topics to win the next election. I don't know at what point our society thought it was fun, cool to insult other people and genuinely hurt people's livelihoods. I don't know what to say. I'm just kind of I'm just more. It's not tough. I'm just more disappointed. Like from when have we got to this place? When are we? Just why? When? I really don't. I don't understand how people our age either can be so horrible just because they have a phone in front of them. I think it's sad that it's gotten to the place it has. But I think it's adults. It's not only us children. It's the adults who are, you know, giving into it. It's the adults who are, you know, there in Parliament saying things in front of families who are, you know, hurting because of social media and playing into the whole game. And it's not a game. It's people's lives, and people have been really hurt by social media. So
Very well said. We have time if a member of our wonderful audience has a burning question that they are keen to get some young people's points of view on. I don't know if we have a microphone, but I know that Mrs. Tremelling certainly has a big enough voice to shout. Yes?
I'd like to know the panelist's view. So just as an aside, I used to work with Keir Starmer back when he was the UPP. And I wrote some personal opinions about him. He was a very good boss, actually. But I just want to know what your opinions are of Angela Rayner, because I just wondered if you would prefer her as an option or not.
So if there was an opportunity to swap Keir Starmer for the Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, would any of our student panellists take that swap up?
I mean, they're one and the same, aren't they? Fundamentally. Fundamentally, like, okay, one's a woman, one's a man. I'd take the woman, but not that much to me, really. They're both.
Yeah. So it'd make much difference?
I reckon that unfortunately we've been put in a position now where Keir Starmer, pragmatically, is the most competent of a group of not very competent people in charge of politics. But he is what we have to make do with at the current moment, because if you look at when you go to more extreme situations, I think Corbyn was mentioned earlier, look what happened. 2019, 365 seats, 202. It wasn't even close. It didn't make a blind bit of difference, but he had ideals and he pushed for them and he wanted them to be instituted. Because let's be honest, he was a twat who didn't have any kind of pragmatic idea of
I think the question
We'll put a bleep on the live feed there. That's,
The question was Angela Rayner or Keir Starmer, not Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, well, to me, again, they're one of the same. They're not that competent, but they're better than anything we've had in the past. So right now, we have to, whichever one is irrelevant to me, we just have to stick with it and hope it goes as it does.
okay. Time for another question. Yes, the lady here. There may be a microphone. There is a microphone.
So I rather wish you people were in the cabinet rather than on the corridor. So currently, the percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds planning to vote Conservative is around about 12 to 14%. Can you give some advice to Rishi about what he needs to do to make more young people vote Conservative? Or is it a lost cause?
So in a sentence, your advice for Rishi Sunak. This seems like a marvellous way to end. We'll have something from each of our panellists. Anyone's advice, the most burning advice? Zoe, what would you say?
Resign. Realistically, whoever replaces him will still be awful, but resign. It's the only thing you can do.
Advice for Rishi on this side of the panel, Malva?
leave the ego behind. Start policies that mean something. Start making people believe in something. Leave the ego behind.
Thomas, I bet you've got some advice for Rishi Sunak, right?
Yeah, I think he needs to step down and let the Labour Party show young people that the Labour Party is a party of young people, and hopefully they don't go back to the Conservative Party and they realise that Labour is the party for them.
Okay. You earlier had a word, though, for being careful with public spending. There must be an element that he could possibly win you round around that argument?
What I was getting at was we can't go Corbyn bonanza on public spending.
Okay.
I think we need to reinvest in our public services, but we need to do it responsibly, is what I was trying to get at. We can't just let loose and throw money unfunded. We need to be responsible. There's a reason that we're in a recession, because Liz Truss did unfunded things with our economy, and we need to be responsible and find a real way back and get our country back on its feet again.
Understood. Becky, you've been invited to give some advice for Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, similar to Zoe, I would basically scrap everything that I'd ever said if I was him and never did, and just completely start again. And also divorce the capitalist wife, sever all your business ties, and I don't know, you know what I would do? I would stand up in front of everyone and I would say, I see you. I see what you're going through. I see how hard this is for you, and I relate. Well, he can't relate, but I would pretend I could relate, because that would get everyone, you know. But I would honestly just make it seem like you were on people's side, because right now it doesn't. He's in a world of his own. He has no idea what the average person in this country's life is like. So relatability, I think, is the key issue.
Thank you. I feel it may be a risk giving you the last word, Jack, but I'm going to risk it.
I'm not going to sit here and say that's all being said very well. He needs to step down, he needs to done. I think the main problem that Conservatives in general have, and that's not just Rishi Sunak, is that young people who maybe are not so actively involved in politics will respond more to action and behaviour that they see around parties than they will to specific policies and facts and figures and stats. And I think the number of scandals and controversies and honestly degradable behaviour that's taken place around the Conservative Party, not just involving Sunak, in the last 5, 6, 10 years, has created an image about young people that the Conservatives just can't be trusted. And I'm not sure there's a whole lot that Sunak can do in this upcoming general election to change that opinion amongst young people. And it has to be a situation where they have to try and regain the trust of young people. How they do that is another question, but I think it's less in terms of party policy and less in terms of just giving up and surrendering. There has to be more done to make the Conservatives and Sunak seem trustworthy and someone who can be depended on by young people to have their interests at heart.
Thank you very much. I am sorry to say that time, the enemy, has got the better of us. Please, can you show your appreciation for our marvellous student athletes? There will now follow a short intermission.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back from that intermission. I hope it was absolutely amazing. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our chair of the main panel of the John Hampden Question Time, Luca Webb.
Good evening and welcome to Question Time 2024. Can I start by saying what a real privilege it is to be back chairing the debate here, particularly as like both David and Ben on the panel here. I worked on the event when I was at the school, and it's brilliant to see it go from strength to strength. And I think whatever your views, our politics can seem rather bleak sometimes, and I think John Hampden Question Time really does stand as a beacon of light, really putting young people at the heart of political discussion, and long may that continue. Now, without further ado, I will announce our illustrious panel for this evening. So starting on the right here, we have Tony Bradell, who is the Liberal Democrat prospective parliamentary candidate for the Wycombe constituency. Tony lives with her family in High Wycombe, where she spent most of her life. She's been a teacher and a senior leader in education for over 26 years. She also specialises in supporting children and young people with additional learning and wellbeing needs, and is a qualified mental health first aider and works in youth mental health. So welcome, Tony. Next to Tony, we have Ed Gemmell, the current Buckinghamshire councillor for Hazelmere and the leader of the Climate Party. Ed is an ex-army officer and city lawyer, a serial entrepreneur, and currently managing director of the national charity Scientists Warning Europe. He is a member of the Local Government Association's Environment, Economy, Housing and Transport Board, and the only politician in the UK elected on the single policy of climate action now. Welcome, Ed. And on my right, we have Ben Triggs, who is International Expansion Director at the Bright Network, another alumnus of JHGS and a former A-level politics student who organised Question Time when it was a BBC Schools competition. He completed his undergraduate studies at the University of Southampton and works at the Bright Network, which is a free membership network designed to help university students and recent graduates across the UK connect with employers. And in his spare time, he's a marathon runner. Welcome, Ben. On my left is David Moore, the very recently elected Buckinghamshire councillor for Farnham Common and Burnham Beeches and parliamentary assistant to Sarah Dines MP. David is also a JHGS alumnus and former organiser of Question Time, they're everywhere tonight, and a graduate of History and International Relations from the University of Exeter. Welcome, David. And next to David, we have Emma Reynolds, who is the Labour prospective parliamentary candidate for the Wycombe constituency. She became Labour MP for Wolverhampton North East from 2010 to 2019 and held various frontbench roles, including shadow minister positions for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs and Housing, before becoming Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government during 2015. Welcome, Emma. And last but by no means least, we have Reem Ibrahim, who is a communications officer at the Institute for Economic Affairs and Linda Whetstone Scholar at the Institute. She regularly appears on television and radio, including the BBC, LBC, GB News, Talk TV and more, and has been published in The Telegraph. She has a particular interest in education policy and also in tobacco harm reduction and tax policy. Welcome, Reem, and welcome to our whole panel. Now, just to briefly explain how tonight will work, thank you to those who've submitted questions as you were walking in. Our A-level politics students have been busy searching for the best ones, and those who have been selected have been notified. I will be getting the audience involved at various points during the evening, and when that's indicated, please raise your hand, and one of our brilliant men in black down either side will rush to you with a microphone so we can hear you as soon as possible. But without further ado, I'd like to ask Jan to give our first question. Do we? Sorry? Jan. Could Jan raise her hand?
Well, okay, Jan had an excellent question, which I'll be Jan asks, how should we tackle the NHS waiting list? And David, I'm going to go to you first. The wait for non-emergency treatment in England, 7.6 million in December 2023, 600,000 higher than December 2022. Do the Tories have a plan B? Plan A doesn't seem to have worked.
Well, I think at the moment with healthcare, in my personal opinion, there's got to be a lot of work to be done. We've seen black holes in the budget, money wasted. We're seeing too much middle managers telling health staff what to do. We're seeing a bloated system that needs reforming. Now, I think the Conservatives do have a plan. It's been a big fight at the moment. But personally, I think that the NHS needs a lot of reform to go. And I think that we need a proper, stronger plan to take place. So that's my view.
Haven't you had quite a few years to develop a strong plan?
Well, I suppose we have. But, you know, I personally, in my own view, I have disagreed with the party of that direction. And that's why I will continue to push the Conservative Party to take a stronger view of NHS reform when all the other parties want to continue with the complacency of having a bloated healthcare system, public healthcare system, without any proper reform and some proper investment.
And anything specific you might do to cut the waiting list now?
So I think what needs to happen to cut the waiting list, we need to start making it more efficient. We need to cut down on, like I said, the bloated spending that's going on. You see healthcare in terms of GDP is getting higher and higher. There's obviously other systems in Europe, for example, such as France and Germany, that have insurance-based systems. I think we should be open to looking at those, in my personal opinion, but also we need to ensure that we remain a national health service and ensure those who need healthcare, and especially those who cannot afford healthcare, get the best healthcare possible, and that's my view.
Thank you, David. Tony, I'll go to you. A number of proposals there. I sense you may not be in total agreement.
I agree with some of the proposals, so absolutely preserving the NHS I agree with. However, I think it's quite short term. I don't hear concrete plans for cutting the waiting list. I hear a lot of sound bites, and with respect. I hear a lot of sound bites, but not much in the way of concrete plans as to how you would get there. So, you know, I think it would be very easy, and I think politicians often do a lot of this, and I am a politician, but I'm primarily a teacher and a human being who lives in this constituency. And I came into politics because I could see too much of this stuff. And ultimately, it would be very easy to sit here and promise you the moon on a stick without actually saying how it's going to be funded, but it's not real. You know, we are going to need to fund the NHS. It would be very easy to say, okay, we're not going to do that. We're not going to kind of put money on your taxes. You know, Lib Dems talk about a penny in the pound on income tax, ring-fence for the NHS. And there are very clear reasons for that. We also talk about lifestyle prescribing, so preventative medicine. A lot of what we do here is kind of shutting the stable door after the horse is bolted, and really if we had a more preventative approach, more holistic approach to healthcare, then we would cut those waiting lists that might otherwise develop. So that's a couple of kind of off the top of my head things. I do agree that some of the NHS is bloated. My sister actually has been working as a cardiac and stroke nurse in the NHS for a long time. And I think one of her main gripes is the fact that there are far too many managers and death by initiative. And as a teacher, and I'm sure every teacher in the room will be able to identify with this, there are so many new initiatives coming through that really aren't for the benefit of the students, but they're tick box exercises, and it's very much the same in the NHS. So I would say that there are far too many managers at that sort of level, and actually we need people doing the work. I would also say that, you know, sadly, the next government, sort of taking over from the Conservatives, are going to inherit a pretty dire situation. So I think that's something we've also got to take into account.
Thank you, Tony. Emma, I'll go to you. We've heard a number of proposals there, sort of positive insurance-based system. We've talked about too many managers, potentially raising taxes. What would Labour be doing?
Well, I think the problems in the NHS are much deeper than that. And I passionately believe in an NHS that is free at the point of delivery and available for all. And Labour is absolutely passionate about getting the NHS back on its knees, because we've seen that this Tory government over the last 14 years, firstly, when I was first an MP, spent £3 billion on an overhaul of the NHS that did nothing to improve patient care. That was Andrew Lansley, for those of you who remember him. And so even going into COVID, we had incredibly high waiting times. Now we have the highest numbers of people waiting for operations on record. That is not a good record. The last time Labour were in power, and when we lost power in 2010, we delivered the lowest waiting times and the highest levels of satisfaction. And yes, we do have a plan. And this government should be ashamed that they don't have a plan. We have a plan to use private sector when we need to get the waiting lists down. We're not afraid to do that. We did that last time and we will do it again. But we also want NHS staff to be paid to work at weekends and evenings, again, to bring the waiting list down. And we want to close the non-dom tax status. This was our idea, by the way, not Jeremy Hunt's, if you see it in the budget next week. And that would fund the plan that we're talking about. But we have a much more fundamental problem than that in the NHS. And I see it week out in Wickham when I speak to people on the doorstep. They rightly complain that they cannot get to see their GP. And they're forced to drive half an hour to Stoke Mandeville to the A&E. We have a problem at the front door of the NHS, which is primary care, and we have a problem at the back door, which is discharge into social care, which has been neglected. So people who are fit to leave hospital and need to leave hospital, because in hospitals there are infections as well. My mother contracted one when she had stage 4 ovarian cancer and it nearly killed her. We need to be able to discharge people from the NHS so that we can get the beds ready for those people who need to get into the NHS, and that's one of the reasons that we've got such a big problem with A&E. So there are huge problems in the NHS, but be under no doubt, this is a Tory-made problem over the last 14 years, because in 2010 we didn't have any of these problems.
We won't get through the questions if you keep applauding. We've got to keep little short applauses, guys. Okay, right, Ben, I'm gonna go to you.
Yeah, so there have been some good tactical ideas, some things which will do it in the short term, but this has to be a longer term vision. And there are some positives out there. I think there was a survey just recently that 13 to 16-year-olds, the most popular job or the most job they'd like to go into is being a doctor. So what are we doing with those people that want to go into the NHS, the most popular at the age of the teenager, most popular profession that they want to go into, and how do we get them in to make sure that we've got a national health service that works for the future? I think we need a large amount of investment in primary care. Again, that's probably more long term, so more on GPs and more on the preventative side. So more on building sort of a national health, so making sure that we are healthy as a nation to ensure that we continue to flourish, and we aren't as necessary on the NHS, because we ultimately have a bit of a challenge. We've got an ageing population. The NHS is going to cost us more and more with an ageing population, with less people of a working age. So it's the things that we put in now, and someone with a long-term plan that comes in is going to be so important for the next 10, 15 years, rather than, of course, there's a couple of bits we can do tactically now, but it's longer term we need to look at.
Thank you, Ben. Reid, do you like what you've heard so far?
Well, I'm very happy that this was our first question. I think that we do need to have an honest conversation about whether or not the NHS is a feasible social security system. And ultimately, at the moment, we're spending just below £200 billion a year on the NHS. So I think it's very easy to sit here and say, you know, what we need to do is spend more money, throw more taxpayer money at what is effectively, in my view, a broken bureaucratic system. And, you know, we're talking about, you know, the number of people on waiting lists. It's expected to peak at 8 million. That is 8 million people in England alone that cannot receive the healthcare that they are expected to. They've all paid into the system and they're not receiving it. Those are 8 million people. Each of those stories, each of those people are suffering as a result of our broken healthcare system. And unfortunately, politicians, and I will say this is on both sides of the political aisle, have failed to deliver on NHS reform. And I think that Emma makes an excellent point here, that actually the solution isn't necessarily spending more money at what is effectively a broken system. We need to have a wider conversation, look across the world, and seek to emulate other healthcare systems. Now, my favourite system is probably the Singaporean system, where effectively nobody goes without healthcare, but you as an individual are responsible for taking on control, and effectively it means that you're able to use the market itself to choose where you get your healthcare from. So if one provider isn't very great, you can go to another. The NHS is a monopoly. It is a public monopoly, and unfortunately means that many people in this country do not have that choice. And I think that everybody deserves to have the choice to receive that kind of healthcare. So my argument would be that effectively we need to look at market mechanisms and introduce choice and competition.
Right. Emma, I thought we were sensing some agreement there, but choice and competition, I feel you may want to push back on that.
Not a big fan. So I think we both need, I'm telling you my view, I think we need both investment because we have such a crisis in the NHS right now, but we do need reform as well, and we do need a shift to prevention. But I agree with Ben. This is not a short-term project because the problems in the NHS are so deep.
Well, if
this
I
is going to take.
Push you on that a short-term project, Labour is saying 2 million operations, scans, and appointments will be achieved in the first year.
Yes, there's no contradiction in that. There's no contradiction in that. You've got to deal with the crisis as it is, but you've also got to take forward a long-term plan, a decade of national renewal to reform the way the NHS works. As I said, the front door and the back door, otherwise our hospitals are going to be in crisis for years to come. So you've got to burn down what they say in the private sector, the burn down. You've got to get the list down of people, all those people, as you rightly said, who are suffering because they can't get the operation that they need. You've got to have a short-term plan for that, but in the longer term, you've got to reform the system and reform the way that the system works in its entirety. So that you can get people into intensive care and into hospital care when they need it. But also we want to deliver more services in the community where we can, because people frankly prefer to be in their homes and it's better for them. So there's lots of things that we need to do. Shift on to a focus on prevention, invest in that technology that allows us to get earlier diagnosis. We've got one of the worst cancer survival rates in Europe because we don't diagnose people's cancers early enough. So this is a long-term plan, but there is obviously a short-term element to the long-term plan.
I'd like to bring in Ed now.
Tough to follow 5 other people when it's not on my favourite topic, actually. But anyway, I'm the leader of the Climate Party nationally, but as was said, I'm an independent councillor locally. So let's start with something local. Let's get an A&E back to Wickham so we don't all have to drive for 45 minutes anywhere else. Lots of the other measures have been talked about. I think probably the most important thing here is preventative. And what are we talking about? Exercise, diet. So let's get out there and tell people that they need to exercise and diet, and let's tell them the way to do it. 5 a day worked, so let's see that working again and see some government money putting into marketing it. And let's make every GP in every single consultation talk about preventative measures, because it isn't happening normally. You get given your antibiotics normally before they've told you to walk up some more stairs or eat in a better way. So let's get a bit more realistic about what GPs are doing. And the other thing is we talk about all the money coming in and everything, we've got to recruit and train. Recruit and train and motivate and keep people in the system. And if we can motivate and keep these brilliant people we have in the system, if we can get them bringing on new people behind them, we'll have all the people we need in the future. There's no point me going on with all the other things because a lot of others have been covered.
Thank you, Ed. I'd like to move on from the NHS, but from what you've heard, everything from emanate Singapore and walk up the stairs, I'd like to get the audience involved, particularly Jan, if Jan is here. So please raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment on anything you've heard so far, and our Men in Black will race over just some final summary comments on this, and then we'll be moving on. Gentleman here.
I think it's a little dispiriting to hear one of our sitting councillors talk about let's just get an A&E, let's just have 5 a day. It's very easy to say it, Ed, but exactly how are you going to get the A&E back to Wickham? Everyone would love it, but practically speaking, how are you going to do that?
Okay.
Ed, very, very briefly, how are you going to do it?
Very, very briefly. Okay. On the assumption that to get the A&E back to Wickham, number one, if I was getting elected as the MP, I'd be in there trying to make sure that we actually distribute A&E more evenly around the country and make sure Wickham got it. So that's the number one thing. You have to invest the money, and you have to then drive the services to get them. I mean, there's no other way to do it. You invest the money, you create the service there. We took it out because we were trying to save money. So we've now got to come back and put it back in because it isn't working.
Where to get the money? Sorry.
Where to get? Well, Can we move straight onto the economy? Because I can tell you where we get it from. I'm all ready for that.
Tax the rich, I assume.
So, well, I'd like the gentleman to get an answer to his question. How are you going to pay for the A&E? Not just the economy, A&E.
On the A&E,
yeah.
You have to get government to actually invest in A&Es around the country where they're needed, and not have people having to come into the minor injuries unit here and then having to drive 45 minutes in pain off to another hospital. We've got to do stuff that works for the people. If we're not doing it for the people, why are we doing it? So let's put the investment in where people want it. Everybody in here cheered when we talked about A&E. That means it's a political decision to move the money and put it into the things that people want and need, and that's an A&E in Wickham.
Excellent. Right, we are going to move on. Wickham is central to all of our lives, but we are moving on. Now, I'd like to, Jenny Summers, a teacher at John Hampden Grammar School. I'd like, Jenny, please raise your hand. There she is.
Hello. With exponential rises in anti-Muslim hatred and anti-Semitism, what does the panel suggest as a good way forward to achieve more community cohesion across the UK today?
Excellent, thank you. Jenny, I'll just repeat the question for everyone. So with exponential rises in anti-Muslim hate and anti-Semitism, what does the panel see as a good way forward to achieve community cohesion across the UK? Let's go to you, Reem.
Thank you. So, I think it's been hugely tragic to see the amount of hate incidents that we've been seeing across the country. And unfortunately, I do have to say, I think that a lot of this is down to politicians in Parliament playing politics with what is effectively an international crisis. And we're seeing across the country, people in this country feel very, very passionately about what is going on in Israel and in Gaza. And it is hugely tragic. We're seeing huge numbers of people dying across both sides. And people in this country, politicians in this country, are using that huge tragedy to win political points in this country. I think that's tragic, and I think that many of them need to take a hard look in the mirror and actually understand the way in which they've been impacting political discourse. Now, you asked what the solution is. Unfortunately, I don't think that politicians themselves seem to be aware of it. Today we've got the by-election in Rochdale, which I'm sure we'll all be following very, very closely, where the Labour candidate said some very, very anti-Semitic things, which again spurred up hatred. Now, the Labour Party correctly, I think Keir Starmer actually sort of responded very quickly and removed that candidate, but it means that there is no Labour candidate in Rochdale at the moment. So again, these kind of hate incidents are occurring across the country, but they don't just start there, they start at the mouths of politicians.
Thank you, Reem. So to provide some context, some stats to Jenny's excellent question. So anti-Muslim hate in the UK has more than tripled in the 4 months since the attacks of 7th of October, and there's been a huge rise in anti-Semitism, a 589% increase in the number of incidents compared with the same period in 2022. Now, Ben, do you agree with Reem? Is it about what politicians are saying, or is there more we can do on community cohesion here?
I have a slightly different view of it. On politicians, I think some politicians have said some awful things and they've been expelled on both sides, on all sides actually. But it is I would say, looking at it, it's a pretty tough job to be a politician at the moment in terms of what they're getting online. We talked about in the earlier debate on online hatred, and I think I haven't experienced it, but I'm sure people in the politics spectrum probably have here and stuff like that. So yeah, I think there has definitely been party politics which needs to stop over issues like this, but also I think we need to get to a point where we can have a debate about things, we can talk about things without the amount of hatred being thrown back at people. So I think there needs to be a balance there. In terms of the original question on in the community, I think it's almost like we've decided that talking and debating and having those conversations can't exist in the communities in there. And I know tension is high, and I know that sometimes listening is quite tricky, especially when that tension is so high. But I think we've got to do all we can to make sure that people are talking and engaging, and politicians can feel comfortable and safe going out and actually talking to their constituencies.
Thank you. Emma, I'm going to come to you in this reflection on the Rochdale election. What's the way forward here?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Reem has said. I think some politicians, not all politicians, have tried to use what is a horrific situation in the Middle East where thousands of people are losing their lives. I would like to see an end to the violence in Gaza. I would like to see an end to those innocent Palestinians being killed and whose 70% of their homes in Gaza have been destroyed. We have a very critical and horrific situation in the Middle East, and obviously the October the 7th attacks, I also, I condemn what happened there. But you're right, Reem, that some politicians, and I'll name one, Lee Anderson, telling, absolutely disgraceful. Somebody that not so long ago, Rishi Sunak, rated so highly, he made him deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. I don't know what that says about Rishi Sunak's judgment of people, essentially spreading Islamophobia and hatred towards Muslims, saying that Sadiq Khan was being run by Islamists in London. And actually the Conservative candidate for London Mayor is also Islamophobic from some of the things she's been saying about Sadiq Khan. I think it's absolutely appalling. And the responsibility of politicians on all sides is to try and take heat out of some of these debates and to try and bring communities together rather than to stoke further division. And certainly if I'm elected here as the Member of Parliament for Wickham, that's what I'll be doing. I'll be trying to bring communities together. And I have been talking to the Muslim community here in Wickham, and I've been talking to a rabbi who is nearby as well. And I'd like to bring those communities together, and I've also been speaking to Christians in Wickham. And I think a lot of people agree that there's been too much violence and too much killing, and they want to see an end to it.
David, I'll let you respond there. You were shaking your head. Are you confident that the Prime Minister stands robustly against anti-Muslim and anti-Jewish hate?
Absolutely, and I just want to make first here, I completely condemn what Lee said, but to say the Conservative mayor, mayoral candidate, who also condemned that Islamophobic is simply wrong.
What she said, Lundistan
I'm very
as well.
concerned that you haven't stood up for public figures who are standing down because of what's occurred. Mike Freer MP's office got torched,
I like
destroyed.
Mike Freer, he's a good one.
Yes, and he had to leave.
He's one of your good ones.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he left because his entire office was torched over what's occurred.
I think that is
Attack.
appalling.
And it's
I think
awful.
that's appalling.
And
I'll
I'll go to my
respond.
point. It's an awful conflict. It's awful what is happening to Palestinians. It was awful what happened in October when Hamas moved in and murdered innocent Jews. We hadn't seen that much massacre since the Holocaust. I mean, it was insane. And of course, the current violence going on, it makes me weep. As a Christian, it really makes me weep. And I pray we continue to uphold the two-state solution where we use diplomacy, back to proper diplomacy instead of stoking violence. I mean, when I work in London, leaving Parliament and seeing lights torched onto Big Ben, anti-Semitic slogans as well. And also the hatred shown by the far right as well. It makes me weep, quite frankly. And we need to make sure we actually stand up for all our communities in this country. A lot of good people are not going into politics anymore after what they've seen. And we have to understand that we cannot let an awful foreign policy tragedy turn into a domestic tragedy. And it's about time we come together as a country, one nation, and unite and understand this country is a beautiful melting pot of different backgrounds, of different faiths, and together we'll stand out hatred, whatever it may be.
Just to press you on that, how are we going to do that? Jenny was looking for a good way forward.
Well, for starters, we need to calm the fire. At the moment, we're seeing a awful situation in Israel and Palestine, and especially in Gaza. So we need to work with diplomatic channels and understand that we have to keep and rely on that to not just stoke up hatred from within and tackle hatred in all its forms.
Thank you, David. Emma, is there anything you'd like to say in response?
Well, I agree with some of that. And by the way, I think Mike Freer is a really a man of great integrity, and it's horrific what's happened to him. It's not just the torching of his office, but he was one of those that had been targeted by the man who stabbed David Amos to death. And the levels of intimidation in politics and violence are unacceptable. And 10, 15 years ago, you'd never think you would see this, but 2 MPs have been murdered in the last 10 years, and it's horrific.
Thank you, Emma. Tony.
So, Jenny, first of all, thank you for the question, and I'm really aware, please excuse me, I'm recovering from a sore throat at the moment. I'm really aware that a lot of the things we're saying here, again, are quite woolly, and you've asked for specific things. So some of the things that I would say is that every teacher in this hall has one of the most fundamental roles, every parent in this hall has one of the most fundamental roles in ensuring that these kind of things don't happen. If we think about, where anti-Semitism and Islamophobia come from, it's fear and ignorance, fear of the other, a lack of understanding. And sadly, schools have become really scared of having these conversations and have kind of, and this is a sweeping generalisation, and part of what I want to say here is that it's really important that we don't get drawn into polarity. There's too much of that, and we can see it an awful lot in politics. It's a degradation of our public life. But really, we need to be creating, schools are safe, or should be, safe spaces to have these conversations, to explore ideas, to challenge perception, to learn about other people in a way that is open, that is challenging, without this kind of binary black and white, right and wrong. There are very few things in life that are really just that binary. And we need to teach young people how to hold two things which are seemingly contradictory in the same space. So to be able to absolutely condemn the attacks of October the 7th and to be able to state that what's happening in Palestine is a genocide, and that those two things exist side by side and they can both be absolutely true at the same time. So I think that's one of the things I would say. I think the point that was made about politicians and MOU, referring to David Ames and to Joe Cox, I worked with Joe Cox. So apart from my work in education, I'm actually part of the House of Lords Task Group on the Middle East and refugees, and I do a lot of work on Palestine and Syria. I advise on war crimes in Syria. And one of the things that I see all the time is this kind of, the othering of people, people that are seemingly, that look different or come from a different place. And we need to stop that. Ultimately, we're all human beings. And when I say stop that, we have to cut it at its core, we have to challenge it. Politicians, and it's to be very honest, it's one of the main reasons I came into politics. I'm a teacher. I'm not somebody who was a career politician, but I saw the state of politics and wanted to get involved to change it, to make it better. But there are too many people who are grandstanding, and I will say...
That's very clear, Tony.
And I have to say as well, David, I admire some of the things that you're saying, but I will say that your party have particularly used that have used sound bites, that have targeted. I mean, if we look at Boris Johnson and
thank you. No, let's not look at Boris Johnson
okay,
right now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tony. I'd like to... Ed, I'm conscious to bring you in. I'd like to bring members of our audience in first. Please raise your hand to reflect. And Jenny, if you'd like to come back with anything. But no, lady in the third row here.
Hi, I'd like to direct this to David. He said that the right wing, the extreme right wing, made him weep as well. I just wondered what he thought about his own party. Clearly moving towards the right, you've got your previous Prime Minister Liz Truss, the lady that got beat by a lettuce, listing Tommy Robinson as, or certainly not arguing as Tommy Robinson as being a hero. You've got Suella Braverman, who delights in seeing refugees being sent off on a plane. So I just wondered what it is, at what point do you start actually thinking that the extreme right and the Conservative Party actually are morphing into one?
David, I'll let you come back on that and respond to some of Tony's reflections.
Thank you, Madam. When I see the diversity of the front bench of the Conservative Party, I don't really see that at all. When I see extreme right-wing party that lets the first ethnic minority... Oh, I'm sorry, Benjamin Disraeli was the first ethnic minority Prime Minister of this country. Conservative. First female Prime Minister. Conservative. 3 of 4 great offices of state at one point were held by ethnic minority people. And that's a great thing. And it just... I was with James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, last night. I sat next to him. And he made this very point. And, being able to want to control borders is not extreme right-wing. We saw this at the Brexit debate where everyone was labelled racist for wanting to control their borders. It's absolute nonsense. And I will completely contest that with respect that we are not an extreme right-wing party but a broad church of aspiring people and people of all backgrounds and all different ethnic, gender backgrounds as well.
That's clear, thank you. So just to clarify, you're not criticising any elements of the party?
I absolutely will criticise those within the party, just like in the Labour Party. George Galloway was once part of the Labour Party, of course, you know, and he's out of it now, so is Lee Anderson. So what's the, you know...
I asked you about the Conservatives.
He was never deputy leader.
Well, yeah, he's not anymore, is he? So,
He has had the whip removed.
Hang on,
yes.
no,
and if I may say, you know, your leader
No,
served happily
we're
under
not on
Corbyn.
George Galloway now. I asked you,
Anyway.
are you criticising any elements of the Conservative Party, which was the question?
No, I think as a whole.
That's
as a whole.
clear. Right, Ed,
Yeah.
I'd like to bring you back in.
When I was the age of a lot of the guys who are here and the girls who are here in the room, so 17, 18, I interrailed around Europe. And very late at night, I was on a night train going through Italy. And I was sitting in a carriage with 3 or 4 other young people around my age from different countries and different ethnicities. And we were chatting about all sorts of topics. And there was an old man in the carriage as well, and he listened to us for about 2 hours. And then he stopped us and said, hang on, I just want to tell you, you are doing the most amazing thing ever. I was an Italian fascist during World War II. And I saw most of you here as being beneath me. And I can see that I was wrong, and that everything you're doing here today is avoiding that problem coming again in the future. We've been asked how we stop the problem in the country, and the only person before me who said anything truly sensible is Tony, because it's not only about bickering politicians, it's about us. It's about us understanding the people around us, understanding the people in the classroom, and it's about us sticking up for them, okay? So when these things happen, we have to stick up for them, whether it's online, whether it's in the classroom, or whether it happens anywhere else. And it doesn't matter what their race or creed is. If somebody else is victimizing them, it's wrong. And we have got to stand up to be counted.
How will you stand up to them, Ed? Just to push you on some, you know, we're
Fine.
looking for a way forward.
Fine. How do you stand up to it? Well, I mean, I say to my son, who's actually at a school very like John Hampden, and when any of these things happen, I say to him, you go in there and stand next to the person. And you're showing solidarity, not with the actual problem, but with that human being that you're saying, I'm with you, and I don't approve of this happening. And he does it, thankfully, and he's got in a few scrapes because of it, but he does it. And that's what we should all be doing, but at every level. And one thing about our leaders...
I think we'd all agree that's what we should be doing, but what are you going to do?
Sorry, you asking me a political question now, because the question was about what we should be doing.
This vision is what, as individuals, we should be doing. But
well, fine.
politically,
If you're now asking me a political question, because I thought the question wasn't political and was asking about what we
for a
can
good
all
way
do.
forward.
Okay, well, I'm reading the question in front of me. That wasn't what I understood. I understood it wasn't political. On a political basis, what I'd be doing is we need to get out of the gates with some marketing. So the government has a lot of campaigns it does on lots of things. We mentioned 5 a day. There's things happening on TfL at the moment about if you're being intimidated on TfL, if you're seeing somebody being intimidated, you should go and intervene. We need to get out the gates with something that's saying, go and intervene in your community to make sure intimidation doesn't happen. There's a second thing, though, and that's that the bickering we see from these ridiculous politicians who have to do all their grandstanding and stuff, I find it pathetic, and it really makes me angry. And what they need to do is just get up and say, look, we think everybody's the same. We want to stop the war, however we can do it. And the way to stop the war is stop bloody well killing people, get round a table and start talking. And all of our politicians should be saying that, and they should be very clear about it.
Thank you, Ed. And you've been very clear too, as of our panel and our audience. Thank you very much. I think we're going to move on to the next question. There's lots of excellent questions to get through here. So, Carol Linton, could you raise your hand, please?
Any government can start supporting local councils because that follows on social care, everything with our roads. Why is that not linked to that? Because we're not spending enough money in local councils.
Thank you very much, Carol. So to repeat the question, how can any government properly fund local councils? And we've got a few councillors on the panel here, and I'll go to one of them, David.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for that question, Carol. It was a great campaign election we stood in, and thank you for the question. In terms of, I completely agree, we need to support our councils in any way, form possible, and I want to see efficient local government. I stood on the points of really fixing our roads, making long-term repairs, cutting waste, and make sure we really tackle the potholes. You know, we talk about councils declaring climate emergencies. I've declared a pothole emergency because that's more important. And the reason why I do that is because it's not for local councils to grandstand about net zero and punishing everyone and telling them to stop eating meat and milk through your lovely marketing
No, but
campaigns.
hang on, David. The question is about how can a government fund local councils, not what they should be doing.
Well, it's obviously funded. You have precepts for parish councils through local taxes. Some of it's devolved. It's good to see. We like to see the East Midlands Combined Authority, for example. You've got these new authorities coming into place. I just want to see more efficient ways to fund local government where it's less cost to the taxpayer. Simple as that. And I want the government to leave people alone and make sure they're empowered to have good services, good highways, and not be force-fed other things. Just have good services, and that's what I'm standing for.
Okay, well, I don't think the 8 councils in England who've declared themselves bankrupt since 2018 would say the government should leave them alone.
Well,
how are they going to be funded to push you on this?
Well, you know, we look at Labour's record on councils. We saw in Slough, they almost, was it £1 billion in debt or something about that? Slough, Croydon, Labour, same old Labour, of course. Yes, and I mean, you see Labour councils as well, and you see the big Progressive Alliance. You see one Lib Dem district council negotiated with a drug dealer for a traveller site. You know, the corruption is insane as well. I want to tackle local government corruption, and that's what we need to do, and that's what I'm standing for. Simple as.
Thank you, David. Ed, I will go to you. You've spoken about things you'd like to fund as well from the government and the council. Is this worrying you?
I hope I'm fractionally clearer than the previous answer, which was for me about as clear as mud. So if I can be fractionally clearer.
I bought for lower taxes. It's quite clear.
Carol, I think what you're actually asking is, how does our government get to the point where we actually have enough money for everything? So you mentioned councils, social services, etc. And that's about having enough money in the pot. Now, to get more money in the pot, what are we going to do? Are we going to continue on the way we're going at the moment, which is with no industrial plan whatsoever, like no plan whatsoever? Or are we going to do what Rachel Reeves is suggesting, and we'll have some fiscal headroom? So actually, we won't spend any money to do anything. So what we'll do is we'll just manage our decline very slowly.
That is not what Rachel is saying.
1 second, I didn't interrupt you.
Have an opportunity.
We can see what's coming down the road, and there was criticism of net zero just now, which is so funny. It's so short-sighted of the Conservatives. Net zero, there's now 92% of the world's GDP is under a net zero commitment. Okay, 92%. Okay, they're all going there. Everybody is going there, and that's where all of the industry is going. They're going to go there, and they're going to get there. And at the moment, Britain has an opportunity there to get at the front. And if we invest heavily, get at the front, roll our sleeves up, and have 1 second, I didn't interrupt you. And we actually have the opportunity to build a clear industrial strategy. Since 1970, we have reduced our manufacturing as a percentage of GDP from 30% down to under 10%. We have now, for more than 25 years, been running a trade deficit. We don't make enough stuff in terms of services or anything else to export. We import everything. So we lose money every single month. And our interest payments are currently $8 billion a month on our national debt. And what we need to do now is focus on the industries of the future, the massive train that's leaving now, and get it and go out there and get at the front of it, make money for Britain. Okay. And we'll see money in the coffers to invest in all of the social services that we were saying don't have money now.
Emma, and then me.
Well, I'm waiting until David comes back next year when he's tackled all the potholes, because I have to say we have a Conservative-led council in Buckinghamshire, and the potholes are dire.
What's the space?
So George Osborne, remember him, and David Cameron, one of the first things that they did when they came into government in 2010 is hugely reduce the amount of money that were given to local councils. And guess what? We now see local councils on their knees. There are Tory leaders of councils around the country complaining about the lack of funding for local services. And who is it affecting? All of us in this room. The state of our roads, the state of our local public services, the lack of prevention when it comes to some of the health services that the local authorities are responsible for. So, you know, do not be under any illusion. This was a decision made centrally in Whitehall about the level of local services that everybody in this room deserves or not deserves. And what they've concluded is that you don't deserve particularly good local services. And don't just take it from me, take it from the Tory leaders who are very active in the Local Government Association, working alongside Labour leaders of councils across the country to argue for better funding.
Emma, how would a Labour government fund local councils?
Well, I would like to see better funding. I completely disagree with Ed. Rachel Rees is not talking about managing decline. We are talking about driving growth in our country by having a proper industrial strategy, which does have a very ambitious green prosperity plan.
That you just cut.
No, we have got a very ambitious green prosperity plan. Well, Ed, I thought you were slightly on the centre-right. All I would say is the state itself will never fund the entire transition to net zero. We've got to leverage investment from the private sector. That's the only way we will do it. We can de-risk some of the riskier investments, such as those in hydrogen or carbon capture and storage. But I work in the private sector, and there are institutional investors who want to invest in renewable energy schemes, but access to the grid is dire and planning is dire. So it's regulatory reform that this government has balked at for some reason, and it's onshore wind, and we can drive growth that way. Therefore, we can get more money into our local public services.
Not right now. I'm going to read.
Usually, whenever you see a politician on television, they'll usually be briefed with a list of things that they spend your taxpayer money on and tell you how fantastic it all is. Now, the question was specifically about how we fund local councils. We currently have, under a so-called Conservative government, the highest tax burden since the Second World War. So we have a higher tax burden now than we ever have under any Labour government since the Second World War. And I think that that in itself is a disgrace. If we're talking about properly funding public services, we need to have a conversation about fiscal decentralisation. I would like to see a country in which local councils are responsible. This is a specific policy change that could actually solve this problem. Local councils should be responsible for raising their own revenue. Now, the reason why I think this is a fantastic policy idea is because it will encourage and incentivise local councils to want more taxpayers in their area. What will that solve? The housing crisis. Young people in this country cannot afford their own homes. The average house price in this country is 10 times the average salary. The reason for that, and I think Emma made this excellent point, that it is regulatory reform. The government are actively restricting housing supply through the regulatory system, through the planning system. And ultimately, the cause of this is effectively this regulation, which means that people aren't investing. Investors don't want to be investing in this country. We want to make the United Kingdom a hub for growth, and ultimately we need to see regulatory reform.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, Ed. I will allow you to come back very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. Talking about cutting the 28 billion, which Labour cut recently, 54% of the country said that shouldn't have been done. So that was right across all the voting sectors. And the reason they said it is because it was investment in our industry in this country that would get us ahead of others. And just 3 days ago, the CBI brought out a report showing that the net zero economy last year grew by 9% in this country. So what we have grew by 9%. Our real economy grew by 0.1%. So investing in the net zero economy is 90 times more effective than what we're doing now.
Thank you, Ed. Ben? Let's get back to the question.
All the time, and maybe I won't be, I'm going to pick up on, all politicians, they talk about growth, like it's a magic money tree. We can get more growth and stuff like that. But the problem is that you've got on one side, and we'll talk about Sunak and Starmer. Sunak's just sort of sitting there and saying things are going well, which I just can't see that at the moment. Things aren't going well, let's continue, we'll get back on growth targets. And Starmer, because he's in the lead, pulling back on the ambitious plans that he has had, a little bit like we talked about the 28 billion in the environment and stuff like that, thinking that if he doesn't have anything, if he doesn't say anything, the Tories can't attack him saying anything. But he should be being attacked. The Tories are going to attack him anyway.
I'm just conscious Carol's worried about the local council.
He's to be attacked anyway, and therefore he should be doing it on bold policies, and it ties into that because we need bolder policies to raise money and actually raise growth. Rather than just saying, we'll get growth and we'll get money from it, we actually need to go, right, here's a set plan for how we get growth. I do agree in some ways that the environment plays a part in it. You do need to be upfront about the significant cost in the short term.
Great,
but
all
long
investments
term
cost.
as well.
Great. Tony.
Anybody who saw Ed and I talking at Hustings in 2019 knows that we agree on quite a lot of things. And actually, I fundamentally agree with you on this, Ed. I believe that we can get ahead of the game in terms of investment. This is, am I going to be the only person to mention Brexit here? The single most, the hugest kind of act of self-harm in terms of bringing investment into our country and in terms of building I'm really aware that we don't exist. You know, we're an island, but no man is an island, right? And if we're looking to develop our economy, then we need to be building those bridges. We need to be part of those organisations where we're able to draw, you know, we're working in collaboration to develop this kind of technology. We're able to get ahead of the game. All of those kind of things.
Just really push you, Tony. You're the only one to have mentioned Brexit. The Lib Dems don't mention it in their 5 priorities. Why is that?
I think actually we do mention rejoining the single market. I think, you know, it wouldn't be the right thing to say, right, you know, let's reverse Brexit. I personally would say that that's not the right thing right now. I do believe it was an incredible act of self-harm. I do believe it was wrong, personally. But I believe that there is, you know, there is a whole load of harm that has been done. We've talked about the grandstanding and the way that the lies that sold Brexit. We know all of that stuff. I'm not going to kind of harp on about that. But I do believe that there is a plan. There is a roadmap that needs to get us there. It's not right for right now.
Thank you, Tony. I fear Carol still may not know how the local councils are being funded, but that's okay because I would like to get to, and I might get in trouble for this, but I'd like to do one final question and I'll have more quick fire answers from all of you. Quick fire across the panel. So Adam McMahon, please can you raise your hand for an interesting last question?
How can schools like John Hampden teach pupils about artificial intelligence and its ethical implications, but without compromising academic standards, or, as I did, using ChatGPT to create this question?
Thank you, Adam. And just to repeat that question for our panel, how can schools teach pupils about artificial intelligence and its ethical implications without compromising academic standards or encouraging cheating? And I'd like to go across the panel very briefly. Reem.
AI is a fantastic technological advancement that has the ability to really change the world. I think we need to be open about actually allowing these technological advancements to change the way in which we look at public services and the way in which we look at the private sector without fear-mongering and ensuring that people are too afraid of advancement and then wanting the government to get rid of it. So I think we should be excited and not afraid.
Brilliant, thank you, Reem. Nice and brief. Emma?
I think AI is a great opportunity, but I do think there are some relatively large pitfalls that we could fall into, and there are some really big ethical problems with the way that AI is used by bad actors, and we're going to see that, unfortunately, this year in the run-up to a general election. So we've got to kind of try and seize the opportunities that AI brings, and I agree with some of what you've said, but we've also got to make sure that we regulate the downside to prevent the harm that some bad actors using AI could really wreak havoc with our society. And we had the discussion with the students, who I thought were brilliant, by the way, on the harm that can come from social media. So I think it's a balance, but it's a great question, and it's one that's being talked about a lot in very many different industries.
Thank you, Emma.
Absolutely agree with Emma and Reem. Buckinghamshire is home to AI. We saw in Bletchley in the 1940s during World War II, where we cracked Enigma, and we saw the first computers being made by the great Alan Turing. And of course, this fantastic school in Buckinghamshire, that's one thing we can really celebrate. We can get the best of both worlds. Teach students how to make their own GPTs. Teach students the wonders of AI and how it can help them and cut on time and boost efficiency, whilst teaching the moralities of it and the ethics of it. I think we can do it both ways. Let's go forward and let this country be the forefront of AI and this county.
Thank you, David. Yeah. Ben, I mean, from a business perspective.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity, and young people are going to absolutely drive it. But I think in the first line, regulation is essential. The government needs to get a grip and get ahead of it, not be behind the curve. It's very difficult to do that, of course. And then equip teachers to be able to teach it in the way that they can and understand the risks of it. And if you're equipping teachers, having those conversations, having those open conversations, and then that allows to demystify some of the things and make sure they truly understand the differences within AI as well, not just use it as a term of just saying, oh, AI, we need to learn about it sort of thing. And then, as I say, getting brilliant teaching at a young age to sort of be able to take the opportunities across all sectors, which will be really exciting.
Thank you, Ben. Ed.
Great. I mean, the question was how schools should be teaching pupils about AI and its ethical implications. I think include it into every single class. It's going to be in everything in our future anyway, so let's include it. Let's control it in what we're doing. Let's allow kids to use it, but let's try and monitor that. And I think just to look on the bright side of it from a teacher's perspective, actually, when AI has been properly developed, actually, it can mark all the essays for you, so you won't have to mark them.
So as a teacher, I've got skin in the game here, right? So the first thing I'm going to say is that as teachers, our goal is to teach children how to think, or young people how to think, not what to think. And I think that is vital. So again, it comes back to the safe spaces to have these kind of conversations where we're talking about the opportunities, we're embracing the opportunities, whilst also holding those two things again in the same space where we've got the pitfalls and the opportunities. I think that's really important. Ed, I agree with you, and definitely embracing it in all subjects. The more that we're kind of talking about this in every subject, the more aware our young people are going to be. Regulation, definitely. One of the things that really concerns me, particularly in relation to young people across the board, is AI social media accounts. I've seen lots of AI influencers. Yeah. I would like it to be, it to be a thing that actually we are made aware that those people are AI influencers. I think that's really important. Otherwise, what are we setting our young people up to aspire to, particularly young women in relation to body image? I think it's really important that they're clear that that's not real and it's not something that they should be aspiring to because it's not real. Aside from that, I think, just having, again, I'm a mum, I have these conversations at home and we talk about these kind of things openly, and it's really doing this in a very holistic way. It's not about kind of hammering just the regulation. We've got to be aware that this is the future and this is where young people are at, and we've got to embrace that.
Thank you, Tony. Right. Well, from polls to Singapore to interrailing, we really have covered it all this evening. And I'd like to start by thanking our brilliant questioners tonight. So to Jan, Jenny, Carol and Adam, or should I say ChatGPT, thank you very much. Thank you to our brilliant panel, to Reem Ibrahim, Emma Reynolds, David Moore, Ben Triggs, Ed Gemmell, and Tony Woodell. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Lovely to meet you. Yeah, lovely to meet you. That was really fun.